So we're so excited to welcome Kate Reuther, who is the founder and director of Uptown Stories, an organization with the mission of providing young writers the chance to discover and develop their inner voices. Before Uptown Stories, Kate taught middle and high school humanities for over 25 years in both public and private schools, including the Tompkins Square Middle School, Calhoun, Fieldstone, and Bank Street. Her own fiction has appeared in the Madison Review, Brainchild, Salamander, and The Ledge. Kate is a lifelong New Yorker and has been living in Washington Heights since 2003 with her 2 kids. Let's welcome Kate.
Next, we have Angie Cruz. Angie Cruz, just give it up. She's a novelist, an editor. She's the author of How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water and Dominicana, which was the inaugural GMA Book Club pick in the 2019 Word Up Uptown Reads selection. It was shortlisted for the Women's Prize, longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and the Aspen Words Literary Prize, winner of the ALA and YALSA Alex Award, and RUSA Notable Book, and Cruz divides her time among Pittsburgh, New York, and Turin. Angelica en la Vida is her first picture book. Give it up for Angie Cruz. Next is Adria Quiñones. Adria Quiñones' poetry has appeared in the New York Times. Mi Tierra is her first published work for children and the first part of a trilogy about Amaya Nunez, her family and friends. A lifelong New Yorker, Adria grew up in Queens and now lives in Washington Heights. Her hobbies include watching tugs on the Hudson and the traffic on the George Washington Bridge. Please give her up. Give it up for Adria Quiñones. And next up is Veronica Vern, who's going to be moderating today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Reza and Jackie. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to everybody for coming today here to Uptown Kid Lit. I'm really excited about this panel. I also wanted to share with anyone who is surprised by the absence of Hilda Eunice Burgos that she was not able to come. She also has a new book that is set in Washington Heights that just came out in July. That's great for ages 8 to 12, and it's called Bodega Cats, and it's part of a series, which is also exciting. So we hope to host an event for her soon when the second or third of the series comes out, but she wasn't able to make it today. So we are very lucky, though, that we have a new addition to the panel. It's Kate. Yes. So anyway. First, we have all just introduced you, but I wanted you to be able to, use your voice here at the start of the panel, like to share your name and just tell us just a line about what your kids' book or kids-focused work is, and generally, how are you feeling today? You can start with Adria.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. Hi. So I'm Adria Quiñones, or Adria Quiñones, depending on which language you are most comfortable with. I grew up in Queens, but I've lived in Washington Heights since end of college. And Washington Heights is really my home. It's the place I've been living in since the mid-'80s, and I love it here. And all my writing is very New York-centric, is very New York-based, but of course if I was going to write a children's book, it was going to take place in Washington Heights. And I feel great to be here and to be here with everybody. And also, I've never been on a panel with such great hair. Just saying.
My name is Angie Cruz. This is my first picture book, Angelica La Guida. And I'm really excited to be here. I love Word Up. Everyone who knows me knows that I love this bookstore so much. And so excited to have a panel with all of you, being that I admire so much the work of what you're doing with Uptown Stories, and I want to get to know your book better, and also Veronica, who is the star of the show, really. Like, because without her, I always imagine a lot of this couldn't be done. I want to encourage the kids. If you need to move your bodies while this is happening, get up, move around. There's grass, roll, whatever. I don't know. Yeah. And adults too. Because I know that that is important, and I don't want parents to feel like kids have to sit through this. So I just wanted to say that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Angie. And I'm very, very honored to be the replacement panelist. No. This is I remember when you first did Kid Lit and thinking, this is such an amazing resource to create for this neighborhood, which has so many artists and has so many authors and has such a rich literary history. And there's so many young people in this community who have stories to tell. And so that's where I come in, and where Uptown Stories comes in is our organization, which just celebrated our 10th anniversary. So I'm really proud about that. We empower young people in this community specifically to write and draw and imagine their own stories, and then publish those stories in paperback anthologies, which are for sale and available at the Up Community Bookshop. So Vern and Word Up have really been instrumental partners to us in creating and publishing, putting all of these young people's voices out into print and into the community. So I'm so grateful.
Yay. So I know we're going to mostly talk about your work, but because we're at a kids festival celebrating reading with lots of kids present, even if not all here in the same tent, I wanted to know, what did you all read as kids? Like, what excited you as young readers?
I'll go first this time. Both my parents were in children's book publishing growing up, actually. So I grew up around a lot of books and a lot of children's books. My father was an editor, which was a blessing and a curse, as I'm sure those of you who are writers can imagine. But my favorite books were always the ones that I maybe were a little edgy, or, got passed around at school as almost like magical texts, like Judy Blume, and definitely Stephen King made a deep impression on me when I was younger. Things that felt a little bit adult and a little bit special, but also had great writing.
It's funny. I don't remember a lot of children's books when I was growing up because we didn't really have them in our house. But what we did have was an encyclopedia. My mother invested in an encyclopedia. And the way I remember it is that there would be one letter that would arrive every month. So it slowly built up as we paid for it. And a lot of members in the community were coming to our house to borrow the encyclopedia. And at the time, I don't know if everyone knows what an encyclopedia is here, but there were all these illustrations in the encyclopedia. And I remember the illustration of like an anteater, and I was like, ooh. So like for me, I would say like my first, I guess as a child, my first entry to stories were the stories that my family were sharing with each other in the kitchen, and how valuable that was. Stories of their childhood. Usually it was about struggle, like, you want to know why my feet are like this? Because I walked 5 miles to get a bucket of water and things like that. But in retrospect, I realized that's what made me a storyteller. It was like these stories that we shared and were shared again and shared again every time we had a meal, every time we visited each other. But if I would say a kid's books that really excited me once I had more access to children's books were books that I read to my kid, which when he was a child, I really discovered children's literature. And he loved all the books that were a little wacky, like Amelia Bedelia. I don't know, are people still reading Amelia Bedelia? Oh my God, he loved Amelia Bedelia, right? Like, I think it formed me in a way, like thinking, and also what we say really matters, which is about language. So let's stay there.
I have so many similar experiences to you that I grew up, the Encyclopedia Britannica.
What a big
had
deal that was.
Right? And it had a special bookshelf in a special room. But my parents weren't so reverent that they minded, if they left me alone, they'd come home and most of the volumes would be on the floor, because at the end of every article, it would say, like, see also, in volume 43. And I go, I need volume 43. And then volume 43 says, go look in volume 12. So they were constantly coming home to piles of books. One thing I think my parents got really right was they never told me not to read something. And they actually went to the librarian at the local New York Public Library. Shout out to Queens Public Library. Shout out to NYPL. And they said if they want it, they can have it. It's fine. And the librarians knew we loved books and always made what was coming in available to us and supported that. And I remember only once my parents saying to me, you might not like that. And I was about 11 and picked up The Godfather. And I think that there was that just might be a little rough. And so I put it down because they had never said, don't read that, you can't have that. Everything was open, everything was available. And when I became a parent, that guided me. So I didn't read a lot of kids lit when I was little because I went very quickly to adult books. They were more interesting to me. They were about real things. And that's, I had my favorite book as a small child was called Or I'll Dress You in Mourning, which was all about the Spanish Civil War. And it's a crazy book for a 7-year-old, honestly. And you go to your other 7-year-olds and let's play Or I'll Dress You in Mourning. And they're like, what? Anyway. So I'm here to just advocate for stories of all kinds. All stories are important, and you never know where they'll bring you.
Thank you. Well, thinking of where things have brought you, what brought you to write to now your books, like writing for kids, deciding after having written many books for adults, like now to do a picture book? Or why was your first book in the format and for the age group that it is, and also publishing work by kids, lots and lots of kids. What is your journey to this point?
Sure, I feel it's interesting because I've always been a writer, but the writing that I do now is much more for myself. I'm in a place right now where I'm just enjoying writing without the intention of publishing. And I do think it's important for people to realize that that's always an option, that you can write something and light it on fire if you want to, but that writing in and of itself and putting it down is valuable outside of sharing it or trying to get it published or the process of that or possibly the ego of that. But I really just felt like, as a classroom teacher, which I was for about 20 years, that my students didn't like the writing curriculum. They hated writing most of the time because they were forced to do these 5-paragraph essays that were so formulaic and prescriptive, and they were being graded on everything that they wrote. And the little bits of creative writing that I could kind of squeeze in were their favorite part, and actually where they would work the hardest, because if you're writing something that you want to write, that's your, imagination, if you're writing about, zombies or robots or unicorns in love, then you're going to put in much more interest and detail and energy than writing a 5-paragraph essay about the causes of the American Revolution, So I really started doing this work almost as an experiment. Like, what would happen if we let kids write what they wanted to write and help them write them really well and publish them? What would they write? I had no idea.
How many unicorn stories?
Yes, lots and lots of unicorns and dragons, but also realistic fiction and poetry and screenwriting and comics, and it's really about, giving them the tools and not deciding what they're going to do with them.
I want to say that if any of you know of any kids or have any kids that want to write their own stories, definitely look up the work that Kate is doing at Uptown Stories. I've gotten so much great feedback from kids who love your workshop, and a lot of times kids are very intimidated because taking a writing workshop doesn't sound as fun as going to take soccer or like whatever it is that they think they want to do. But in this moment right now, we're talking a lot about anxiety and young children and too much screen time. I, as a professor, have been doing a lot more work in class where I actually have my students write in class. And this is really important work. Like they say, I don't know why when I come to this class, all my anxiety goes away. And I said, because we're handwriting and reading stories out loud. That's what we do in my class now in college, because they are not doing this on their own. When they read, they skim, because technology has made everything that you could do, everything you don't want to do, you want to do very fast. So when you think about the power of actually writing stories, not even to publish, just as a mechanism to really listen to yourself, but also to relax your state, right? Like your anxious state or whatever it is that you're feeling, that is endemic right now. Like this is endemic in adults and children. So thank you so much for doing this work. It's very hard work because we're fighting a huge machine that's discouraging our children from thinking and being at peace with themselves. So drawing, writing, reading out loud. Like, I just asked my mother, I was like, oh, is my uncle reading to his children? She's like, well, he tries to get them to read. I said, it's so important to read in community, even with your kids, because the pleasure of language is something that you have to actually teach. It doesn't come naturally. Oh, I'm a reader, I understand words. Like reading with my kid, I did it every night because I wanted him to love language. I wanted him to love the sound of the language. I didn't want him to just look at the photos or the pictures. And so I'm really I just want to state that because I feel like even the encyclopedia, where you said what your parents did right, I feel like what my mother did right. I mean, she's here, so it's kind of I don't want to she hates when I out her, but I want to say as a person who was a single young mother, teenage mom, the fact that she decided to invest in an encyclopedia when we didn't even have enough to eat is wow, what a vision to think that objects of books, when no one else was really in our environment really saying, oh yeah, instead of a cute outfit, we're gonna buy an encyclopedia. How it really planted a seed in me of curiosity. See also? I remember see also. In fact, I still am see also, and then I go deeper, right? How important it is when we plant those seeds, even if it seems like no one's paying attention. You're well, I don't think it really mattered. They never looked at the book. I gave it to them, but they never looked at it. But actually, there's studies that just having a book, even if you never read it in your presence, actually will help you become a better reader in the future, which is a wild thing.
I'm so excited by this panel. I'm so happy to be here. But thank you. When I started writing for children, I literally woke up one morning. It was a Saturday morning. It was 7:30 in my morning. My husband's like, where are you going? I said, I just had an idea for a novel. I'm going to go write. And he's like, all right. Okay. It's what one does on a Saturday morning. But I felt like it was a gift. I could see the whole arc, and this was a gift. And I worked on writing novels for a long time, and I took writing seriously. I'm a technical writer in my day job and have been for years. And I will say this, the struggle is the same. I need to get somebody to turn the page. And that is it doesn't matter what you're doing, that's the struggle. But I only started writing, there was our wedding anniversary was coming up, and I had an idea for a poem, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I haven't written poetry since grade school. And there's so much of this, this kind of writing is associated with school or whatever. And so we don't do it as adults. Or I'm not good at it, so I don't draw. And yet, what I really believe is that art should be, all of us should make art. All of us can make art. It might not be art for sale, but why should it be? You know, we don't need to just buy art. No, we create it, and then it satisfies a need within our soul. And if we're lucky, we share it with somebody and they say, you know, me too. Mm-hmm. Me too. And that's the power of creating art. And if you're a parent or if you're just a person, just think about creating something for you, for yourself, and maybe it will resonate with other people, but the most important thing is it reflects your experience. And when we're lucky, we do reflect a larger experience. Also, if there are any parents or people, any people, I created a whole bunch of worksheets that go along with Mi Tierra about using it as a model or how to think about writing something and how to lead into writing a poem. And you can get them from me, or it's so blowy out, I haven't found a good place to put them. Just come to me and you can have all the worksheets.
After all this talk about the writing, I think maybe it's time to hear a little bit about, hear a little excerpt of everyone's work. Maybe starting with Adria.
I'm going to start by reading the poem Mi Tierra, which is obviously the name of the book. And it's the first poem I wrote in the Mi Tierra series. And it's interesting to me because I'm the first generation of my family to grow up on both sides, grow up speaking English dominantly. And yet, this poem and this book is Mi Tierra, and we can talk about that. Every other year, my abuelo takes a boat or a plane to come to Washington Heights from Spain. He walks me to school, he watches my baby sister, and he takes us for ice cream. He cooks dinner. He teaches me the names for food: leche, huevos, jugo, sopa. Espaguetis makes me laugh, an Italian name tossed with Spanish spelling. He stays for 2 or 3 months until it feels like he'll always be with us, until I see him start to pack. Then I know we only have a few more days. Why can't you stay with us, abuelo? Why do you have to go back to Spain? Es mi tierra, he tells me. Es mi tierra. Bronx grandpa and grandma go back to Puerto Rico twice a year. Por fin, says grandma when they're getting ready to leave. Regresamos a mi tierra. We go to Vermont every summer. Every year we stay in the same cabin. Every year the same families. Every year the same things. Swimming in the lake, playing hide and seek in the woods. Boo-Boo from Montreal, Darren from Boston, Isabel and Winnie from Philadelphia. Vermont is not mi tierra. Vermont needs a car. Washington Heights has subways. Vermont has farms and houses. Washington Heights has parks and apartment buildings and a friend who lives on the other side of your bedroom wall. When you knock, they knock back. Tia Rosa thinks Washington Heights has too many people, too close together. She wants a house in her own backyard, but I like having sidewalks, subway cars to share. When I am old, I will say, vamos a regresar a mi tierra, just like my grandparents, but it will be Washington Heights.
Should I go next? Okay. So I'm just going to read a little bit because I'm going to be reading it again.
Yeah, we'll hear the next presentation is actually a presentation of the whole book with Luz Batista.
And it's here, right?
And it's here.
It's here. And it's going to be with Luz Batista, who did the most beautiful, beautiful drawings. I'm so proud of these drawings and this collaboration with a rising star, for sure. So I'm just going to read a tiny bit so you get a taste of it. And then maybe you'll come back. I don't know. I hope so. Okay. So the day before Angelica left, Abuelito pulled out a wooden box from under his bed and said, "Over 100 years ago, on a land where rocks are plenty, In the greenest valley, between the mountains, this guira played its song. Out of the box came a shiny hollow steel can the length of Angelica's arm. Abuelito held it with his right hand. With his left hand, he scraped this rough surface with a metal comb. Steady, like the beat of a drum, he made it sing. Cha-cha-chee, 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 chee-chee. I'll be asking you all to sing with me next time. Thank you.
So I brought a poem by a student named Isabella Talamantes. I believe she was 11 when she wrote this. I also just want to give a shout out to my student Araceli, who's here in the audience. I wish I'd brought something by you. But this is called Ode to Subway Delays, which I thought was appropriate. It's very of our neighborhood. Ode to subway delays. Ode to the sweaty faces of the people trying to make their way home. Praise the single mother carrying home the groceries of her family. Praise the heartbroken boy. Praise the dancer. Praise the hard worker. Thanks to the glance between stand buyers and listeners. Thanks to the lock of eyes between the child and the singer. Ode to the girl. Ode to the rats smuggling scraps, scurrying through the tracks. Ode to the constructor of transportation. Ode to the vagabond wandering through the platforms. Thanks to the loss of time. Praise the loss of productiveness. Change our view of every perspective. Change our opinion of little inconveniences. I pity the fool, to whoever will not stop and look at the little cracks in the wall, the trash in the tracks, the singer and frustration and hurt in people's eyes. Stop to think of how beautiful the platform is. Transporting people from all over the boroughs, neighborhood to neighborhood, street to street. Eyes greet each other. Eyes, a glance, is worth 1,000 words. 1,000 seconds can say every thought. Ode to the subway delays, where people will stop to notice. Ode to the subway delays.
Also, I have to mention that after I first read Mi Tierra, which I wasn't expecting at all, I like got teary at the end of the book. It's like an early reader. It's the first time that's happened, reading an early reader like book. But yeah, there's so much. I love the picture of Uptown that all of your books and the writing bring, but both in the writing and in the illustrations that accompany your books. And I guess, they're all, you were just reading characters and, the fictional, within there. But what you yourselves, what inspires you about Uptown? What you all are lifelong New Yorkers, one who grew up uptown, but you're all here now, and you continue to be, and you've made that the focus of your work. What is it that's, buzzing for you always?
Uptown is the first place I've lived where I felt like I fit in. My parents' view of making it, as a New Yorker, it's like, okay, we've left, the South Bronx, we've left Spanish Harlem, we moved to Queens, and I spent my whole childhood just feeling so different, and it was like a relief to live in a place where many people spoke many languages, and that there was a lot of Spanish. My Spanish greengrocer spoke better Spanish than my Korean greengrocer spoke better Spanish than I did, and I loved that. And I just feel like I can be myself as a mixed person of Spanish and Puerto Rican heritage, and I can fit in a place that has broad arms for everyone, and I I respect Washington Heights as a center of Dominican New York. And I am so, grateful for the food, for the language, for the conversation, for the camaraderie that exists here. And, I've now lived in Washington Heights much longer than I lived in Queens. And that's the place that lives in my imagination. This is what lives in my imagination. Everyone here.
I was thinking when you were saying that, I was born and raised in Washington Heights. Like, my entire extended family still lives here. I am one of these anomalies now because so many people have been pushed out. But for some reason, my family has been able to stay here and wants to stay here. And I now have a teenager, and he thinks Washington Heights is home for him, even though he was born in part of the time in College Station, Texas, because that's where I was teaching. And then I moved him to Pittsburgh, and then I brought him to Washington Heights. And I said, why do you love it here so much? Because I know why I love it, because it's just familiar and just what I know. And New York, I think when you're born in New York, nothing really competes with whatever New York is. It's like kind of a weird thing that goes into your body. But for him, who wasn't raised or born in New York, he says, it is the place I feel most like myself. And I said, wow, like, that's really interesting. He goes, Mom, I don't want to leave Washington Heights because it's where I feel most myself. And I thought, what a beautiful way to think of home. Like, home is wherever you feel most yourself. And it might not be where you grew up, right? It might be something totally different. For me, though, like, writing books about Washington Heights, my God, 25 years I've been all my books are about Washington Heights. All my adult novels is really like my disbelief at being a Dominican in New York City and having a family who's been here since the 60s and knowing that we're 9 to 10% of the population of New York City and that we rarely see ourselves represented is still a shocking thing to me. That's what I've been told over and over. We're 900 to 1 million people. Dominicans live in New York City. That is a lot of people that are Dominican identified or from the diaspora, and yet we're still so underrepresented. Our stories are still like, I think there's one TV show. I was just told, Luz just told me there's one TV show with this Dominican animated character, Owl House. And on TV and Disney, and I was like, one. And if you think about how many of us there are here, and I feel like that does motivate me to write, because I'm like, well, I got stories, and I now have the privilege to tell those stories. So that's really why I'm doing it in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I first moved uptown. I grew up in New York City on the Upper West Side. And in many ways, I think what attracted me to Washington Heights first around Y2K was it reminded me of the Upper West Side when I was growing up, which was at the time a much more mixed, up middle, both ethnically and economically mixed neighborhood than it is now. And that there were a lot of artists and a lot of, musicians, and I was kind of like, oh, this sort of feels like home. But then the more time I spent here, I think it's really about the community up here for me, which feels different than a lot of other neighborhoods that I know and I've lived, because I've lived in all the boroughs except Staten Island. I'm gonna not even touch that one, but
The whole room stopped. Pause.
But I felt most at home here because I felt really known here. I felt like when I would meet people, I would see them again on the street, and then I would see them again getting milk, and they would say hi to me, and I would know their kids, and they would know my kids' name. And if I was at the playground and had to run and get something, then some other parent would volunteer to watch my kids, and I would know them and trust them, and those kinds of moments. And especially now, doing Uptown Stories for all these years, I walk around and I know all these kids, and then all of these people who used to be kids who are now big, gangly teenagers and young people who are now, graduating from college. And I've known them since they were little and know their stories. So that's just such a privilege, to watch these young people grow up and watch their stories grow up too.
I have so many more questions for you, but I realize the time means that I should see if anyone else actually has questions too, because I can ask you all anytime. Does anyone have a question? You can come up, or I can repeat your question so that it's on the microphone. Yes.
Yes, I wonder how you test first-time writer, first-time book.
Do you want to come up to the...
Thank you. Yes, my question is how you test the reading with kids. No? And how do you involve in your writing the adults? Because I tend to do that, just curious about you.
Is this a question of knowing, when you were creating the works, using, having kids as your test audience as you were developing it?
Well, the work that my students do isn't necessarily for kids, I taught a horror writing class, and then that class had so many love stories in it that we changed it to a romance class. I'm completely serious. They were teenagers, the writers, but part of what was, I think, fun about it was the idea of writing something that was not for kids, that you can't do in school. They just because they're teenagers doesn't mean all of their ideas are for little kids. And often I think young people want to imagine themselves as older. Most young people, when they're writing a story, will make the narrator 2, 3, 4 years older than them, typically.
I have a child who is I'm in a lot of communication with him, and the big test was reading other books and seeing and noticing what was interesting to him and why he wanted to reread the same book over and over and over again. My son in particular loved very active books where characters are doing a lot of things, but also where there was repetition, and sonic repetition was very interesting to him, right? So when we were reading together, he liked interactive reading. So we would read, and he liked that he was able to guess what I was going to say. So I said, okay, when I write this book, I'm going to imagine that when you're reading it with them, the kid is almost collaborating with you in the reading. So by the time they read it the second time, they're going to know exactly what they need to say. So suddenly they're empowered to read it again and again and again. And so the test really is I sent the book to a few friends with kids, and they're like, they read it 4 times tonight. I think you have a hit. And I was like, that's good, So my test is the same way that my son was like, let's do it again. Yeah. Let's do it again, and to try to write a book that has some history. This book really is about inheritance and finding your voice. Those are my desires, for him to care about what elders impart. Yeah. But while he's reading, he's just having fun, So there's 2 layers. So the parent can read it for themselves, but the kids are reading it for the fun. Yeah.
My story about Mi Tierra is not a normal story. I was working a lot on writing for children, and I did read to my son and his friends, or I will say our friends, when I was doing that. But when I wrote Mi Tierra, I wrote it so fast, and all the poems so I showed them to the woman who ended up becoming the editor of the book, Winsome Bingham, but I didn't actually almost have time to show it to anybody. I just wrote so quickly, and then the publisher so quickly was just like, oh, could you be done soon already? It was just this rush of a thing. But I think that what I was served by was having that community of interaction with children and interaction with people who care about children and interaction with people who care about writing for children. And that, although I didn't draw on that in that big moment, they are my world also. And that it's very important to have, to have communities to draw on, whether it's a creative community, plus the community of parents, whoever your audience is, whoever your target audience is, to be part of that and to be communicating and in community with them.
This was great. There's 1 minute left. I'm getting a wrap up, please sign. So I think we'll have to wrap it up. But if you have any other questions for these authors. Oh, yes. If everybody in the panel could please say your name, the book that you wrote, or where you're representing, and know that everything will also be available at the book signing tent, book selling tent, or if we happen to be sold out of anything, that you can always get it at wordupbooks.com and request, because everyone's local, that they be signed, and that is very easy to do. But if everyone could reintroduce themselves, that would be wonderful.
I'm Adria Quiñones, and my book is Mi Tierra. This is the first of a 3-book series that takes place here in Washington Heights.
My name is Angie Cruz, and I wrote Angelica La Guida. And I just want to say, when you're going to buy a book, if you can, please try to support independent bookstores. It's really, really important. And because we're in the moment of elections, I feel like I always tell everyone, I said, we vote by what we buy. And in this particular moment, where so many books by writers of color and queer writers are being banned or are being pulled out of bookshelves, it is a really crucial time to support the kind of stories that you want to see in books, because it is in crisis. And I want to say this as someone who is pretty privileged, and I have a big machine behind me, but I also know it's a really tough moment for all books. So if you really want to see more books about this community, or you really want to see more books about Dominican Washington Heights, or whatever it is you want to see, this is the time to say, okay, if I'm going to buy it, I'm going to vote in this way for this particular kind of literature, or ask for it in your library. Encourage them to carry it, et cetera, et cetera.
Or your schools.
Or your schools as well.
And I am Kate Reuther. I'm the founder and executive director of Uptown Stories, and we're a local youth writing nonprofit.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.